So it was a Thursday, and my husband has decided that it's time the family starts going hunting with him. He goes by himself or his friend every year, and our oldest son. So now he decides it's time for us to start going. So my oldest was working, so we took my 14-year-old daughter and my 12-year-old son. And Thursday we decided to leave, and initially the plan was we would go out Thursday night, and I would come back Monday with my son, and he would stay out for 10 days. So we went out there, we packed up and pulled the kids out of school, dropped the little ones off at Grandma's, and headed on out. I'm not allowed to disclose the exact location because my husband says it's top secret. So we went pretty far out, about 2.5 hours outside of town and to a trailhead, and got on the four-wheelers and headed about 14 miles in to our campsite. And it was pretty uneventful in. I led the way and he followed with the trailer, and the kids were in between us. And we went through 2 small creeks that were not too deep, about maybe a foot deep and maybe about 6 feet wide, and about 8 feet wide the other one. So there was no real issues. There was a huge hill that we told the kids to be super careful on because it's a slate hill and you'll slide down it if you're not careful. So we drove in there, set up camp, and started hunting. So Friday night was great, and we had good weather, and we're sitting there, and my husband drops the bomb on me when I say, hey, when we go out Monday, are you guys gonna, stay for a little while and help us tie everything down? And he's like, oh, no, you're going by yourself. Just you and Gage are going out, my 12-year-old son. So you're not going with me? He said, no, you got this. You're all right. So I said, okay. So I spent 2 days pretty mad at him for telling me that wasn't part of the plan, I thought. So we hunted for a while, and then come Sunday I decided, well, he's pretty serious about this, so obviously I'm going to be doing this on my own. So my son and I said Sunday, all right, let's get ourselves psyched up here to go because it's just going to be us. So Monday morning we packed up our stuff, and him and I said goodbye to Dad and sister, and we headed out. And we made it about 10 miles, pretty uneventful, no real issues, until we came to the first creek, which was technically the second creek on the way in, and it was quite a bit higher than it was the first time we went through it. And I said, well, it's not that far across, we got this. So we floored it through it, and it pushed us a little bit, but we both made it across. So we kept on going, and we went down to the next creek, which really wasn't a creek anymore. And I looked at it, and we pulled up, and I looked at my son, and I'm like, what do you think? He's like, well, it's a little bigger. Yeah, but it's wide, right? It's not deep, it's just wide. He's like, yeah. So we stuck a stick in it, and we got this. So I started to go in, and I drove the four-wheeler in a little bit, and the next thing you know, I can feel the front end start to float a little bit, and in true Alaskan tradition, if you when in doubt, gas it out. So I floored it, and the four-wheeler went about another 6 inches before it got sucked up by the river. So I bobbed on it for a little while, and then it flipped me off and threw me into the drink and took the four-wheeler down the river. So I swam to the other side and pulled myself out, soaking wet, and my son's now trapped on one side of the river, and I'm trapped on the other. There was no way across. So I said, okay, so I'm thinking, what do I do? And I said, I remember at the top of the very steep hill, there was a camp there. I said, so stay there, don't make any noise, and I'm gonna go climb the hill and see if the camp is there. So we stayed there, and he was quiet, and I climbed. It took me about 45 minutes, because I'm not in the best of physical condition. Got to the top, and the camp was gone. So I stood where the camp was, and I cried. What do I do? What do I do now? So I'm like, well, maybe there is a little bit higher of a peak. Maybe at the top of that peak, there will be a camp, because there's a campsite. So I climbed to the top of the very tippy top of the peak and stood there. There was no camp. They were gone as well. So I stood in that spot and cried. And I said, now what do I do? So then I had to make the choice. It was about 3 miles to the road in the middle of nowhere in our undisclosed location, hoping that I could find somebody. And of course, he'd heard the stories about places way out that didn't like people. And I thought maybe I'd get murdered if I went out there. So I thought maybe that's not the best idea if I don't get murdered or eaten by something in the way out there. So I decided, of course, I can't leave my kid. So I traipsed back down the hill, and about 3/4 of the way down, there was an old, probably 1970s snow machine sitting there with an old rope around it. And I said, well, maybe if I salvage this rope, I can use this rope to get back across the river. So I'm almost down the hill, and I can hear my son yelling, Mom! Mom! Like, oh my God, he's gonna make a bear come. So I start running towards him. I'm like, I'm right here. He's like, you were gone forever. I thought you died. I'm like, okay, I had to climb the hill. So I've got the rope and I'm looking, and he's probably about 30 feet away from me across the river. And I said, all right, here's the plan. I'm gonna tie the rope to myself. You're gonna tie it to the four-wheeler, and you're gonna gun it and drag me across the river. And he looks at me. And he's like, really? What if the rope falls off? I'm like, well, I don't know. He's like, I'm not doing that. I said, okay. All right, so shimmy up the tree. You're going to tie it to the top of the tree, and I'm going to Tarzan across. He's like, I'm not climbing the tree. I don't want to climb the tree. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to get across? So off to my left, there was a log that had fallen across the river. And the bottom part of it was submerged in the river, but it was the only way to get across. The four-wheeler was gone. So I said, so you're going to crawl across the log to me, and together we'll go find help. So he walks over to the log, and he looks at it, and he says, I'm not climbing across the log. I said, well, your side's big. You've got the big side. Just crawl across, and then when you get close, I'll just rip you over. I'm not crawling across the log. So I said, okay, I guess I'm crawling across the log. So I traipsed through the river, and it was probably about waist deep, traipsed through, got over as close as I could, and climbed up on a grass berm, put my hands on the log. I said, all right, I'm going to cross the log. So I crossed over, and the entire time I was crossing the log, if anybody has kids, the movie Horton Hears a Who, I just kept going, I'm as light as a feather, all the way till I got to the other side. And I made it. I got over there, and I gave my son a hug, and I said, all right, let's try to lasso the four-wheeler so we can at least get the gun. So the four-wheeler's bobbing in this kind of little knoll over area that's full of water, and we spent 20 minutes or so lassoing it, couldn't get it. And I said, this day can't get any worse. And as if on cue, it starts pouring. Really? Like, how many more things can go wrong? So I climb back, we go back over, and I said, all right, let's take your four-wheeler and go back. I said, we've got 14 miles back to Dad. I said, at least then we know there's people there, we're safe. So we got back on the four-wheeler and discovered his winch was broken. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess we just can't ever get stuck. We make it the 14 miles back in, and I can see my husband and my daughter in the distance with their binoculars and scopes looking for moose, kind of looking, heads cocked, like, what's going on? So we pull up, they're sitting up on a hill looking, and we pull up and kind of drive past them a little bit, and he walks over, and I get off the four-wheeler, and he goes, what the hell? What are you doing? I said, well, I've had the worst day ever, and I just started bawling. So he let me cry for a little while, but I knew he was really wanting to know where the other four-wheeler was. He didn't really care that I was all right. So he looks at me, and he's like, all right, all right. Where's the four-wheeler? It's in the river. And he's like, what river? There's a river. So I don't think he believed me so much, but it was already late, and we broke down, and we wound up staying there that night. And of course, the next morning, he had to cut his moose hunting trip short, break everything down, and come with us to the supposed river. So on the way there, we ran into another guy that was camped there, and he was like, well, let me see this river that you fell in. So he came with us, and sure enough, we got down there, and the river, the first river that we had went through, was now impassable. So it was only about 6 feet across, but you couldn't get through it. It was completely full. So we cut a trail around that and went to the part where I fell in. So we go up to there, and my husband looks and pull up to it. We're all kind of surrounding the river, and he gets off his four-wheeler, looks at it, and he goes, that's a river. I told you it was a river. Why would you drive through that? It's a river. I don't know. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. I wanted to go home. And he's like, I can't believe you did that. So, long story short, we wound up having to set up camp. We were stranded there, and it was an island, so it became stuck between two rivers now. So we wound up setting up camp, and we were stuck there for an additional about 7 days. And in that time, we met some people. We were stranded with 7 other families because they would come down, get stuck, and couldn't leave. There was no way out. So we made some new friends. We made some friends. Sarah, Gabe, and Izzy were our new friends, and we were slowly running out of food and rations and started eating the moose that people had killed. We didn't get a moose, but we started eating the other people's moose. And it was an interesting time. But we made people, and then eventually we wound up being able to, the river, we watched the river every day, and for a while it got higher, and then a while it got lower. And one of the guys that had come down there had been quite a bit further out than us and had killed a moose, or a wolf, which he said was the alpha male. Well, he hadn't wrapped it properly and had drug the scent of the wolf down to our site. So for the Once that guy came in, for the next 3 days, we were surrounded by a wolf pack. And when you'd wake up in the morning and look out the door, you see padded little wolf feet, and you'd hear them howling at all hours. So this was a great addition to our club, I must say. So eventually we wound up being able to get out, and I had to crawl. These guys came down, military guys came down, and they wanted to get across the river because their dad was trapped on the other side. And we wound up being able to crawl back across the stupid log, my son and I, and they took us out to our car. So we wound up going out to our car, go back into Fairbanks, and round up my oldest son and 2 more four-wheelers to go try to help my family back out and bring some rations in. So we go down there, capes flying, we're there to save the day, and they're already across the river. Great. So we did nothing. So we wound up spending our last night there and not getting a moose and heading back to the car. So when we got out, it was my father's birthday when we got out, and I called him and I told him what happened, and he was super mad. He's like, I can't believe you would do that. I can't believe you would put yourself in that situation. And then once he finally calmed down, he was like, that's a great story. You should tell that story. And the words of my father, he says, the Irish people, they spin a good yarn. A week after I talked to my dad, he passed away. So I tell this story to honor my dad. I love him. Thank you.